33 years ago, the deaf mutes of this country were in the darkness of the grossest ignorance and poverty, with no means of conveying their ideas to others. Now, there are many similar places of instruction, all arising from this institution.
The American School for the Deaf is located in West Hartford, Connecticut, and was established 203 years ago. It is also the first permanent school for the deaf in America and has broken many barriers for the deaf since its establishment and has paved the way for special education in the United States. The establishment of the American School for the Deaf in the early 19th century broke communication and educational barriers and continues to do so today. In 1815, a traveling Congregationalist minister named Thomas Gallaudet came to Hartford, Connecticut, and met Dr. Cogswell, whose daughter was deaf and mute and had no opportunity for an education or life outside of her home. Gallaudet saw Alice trying to interact with her siblings and wanted to help her. Part of Gallaudet's job was to teach children without teachers in places he visited, so he took on the responsibility of teaching Alice to communicate. Each day he sat with her and taught her how to write words by writing letters in the dirt. Around this time, almost everyone in the United States thought deaf were capable of learning. Gallaudet took a chance on Alice, and when he taught her, he confirmed his belief that deaf had the capacity to learn. Alice Cogswell inspired Thomas Gallaudet to create a school for deaf education. During this time period, a Christian movement went on which encouraged people to teach others about the Bible. This movement was called the Second Great Awakening. Gallaudet was a minister who believed this and wanted to teach Alice, along with other deaf children, about the Bible and Christianity. As Mason Cogswell wrote in a letter to the public before opening of the school, while the directors gratefully acknowledge the goodness of God and all the success which he has been pleased thus far to crown the feeble efforts in his service, and while they would devotedly rely on Jesus Christ and the head of the church to make the future labors subservient to the best interests. Gallaudet also did not believe in the social stigma about deaf individuals and wanted them to receive the same opportunities as the hearing. He understood that they were capable of mental achievement. His religion and philosophy inspired him to teach Alice Cogswell, and teaching her drove him to establish the American School for the Deaf.
While teaching Alice, Gallaudet decided he wanted to educate more deaf children. To acquire the necessary resources, Dr. Cogswell paid for Gallaudet to travel to Europe and study deaf education. Gallaudet first traveled to the Briarwood School in England, but he was turned away upon arrival because the school demanded payment for every student he was going to teach. Gallaudet then heard about a deaf school in France and decided to travel there. At that school, he met a student named Laurent Clerc who was willing to help him. Together, the two men traveled back to the United States to establish a school for deaf education. In the early 19th century, it was believed that those who were deaf had a mental illness and had no future. Deaf individuals were often sent to a mental hospital or were left at home and received no form of education. In some cases, the deaf were forced to work harsh jobs for often no pay. This was especially common during times of war or other times when there was a lack of people involved in the workforce. This is why the hearing impaired were looked down on in society and were seen as a drain on resources and incapable of achievement. The school took down many barriers for the deaf, two of which were communication and education barriers. Before the school, the deaf and mute had no formal language, at least in the United States, let alone special education. The school provided them with both. By writing textbooks and having classes that were made specifically for deaf communication, the school broke education barriers in the United States. By tailoring a curriculum to meet the deaf's needs, the school is the first permanent one to properly educate those with a disability. Also, the American School for the Deaf was the first school in America to receive government aid for special education. This alone demolished special education barriers because it showed society that it is important to educate those with disabilities, and it paved the way for other special education schools to open. By giving the deaf the education they need and deserve, the school tore down the education barriers in the United States.
The class a child was put into depended upon which class they thought the student would be most receptive to. This was a very different way of thinking when it came not just to educating deaf, but any child. The school did whatever it took to make sure each individual child was successful. The school was also one of the first in the United States to teach students of all races. African Americans at this time did not receive proper education, especially not the deaf ones. From the very beginning, the school taught and cared for students of all races, which destroyed barriers not just for the hearing impaired, but for all equal education in America.
Here, it is witnessed for the first time in this Western world, the affecting sight of a little group of fellow sufferers assembling for instruction, whom neither sex nor age nor distance could prevent from hastening to embrace the first opportunity of aspiring to the privileges that we enjoy as rational, social, and immortal beings. By tailoring a curriculum for the deaf, receiving government aid, and educating all races, the American School for the Deaf broke education barriers in early 19th century United States.
The rich history of the school helps further influence the students' education. In the words of ASD alumna and former teacher Kathy Jarby, we learned about Laurent Clark, who moved to America from France, and that he taught sign language. Laurent was so successful, and it influenced me and the others to succeed in life after graduation.
The school created American Sign Language, which is derived from French Sign Language, but also from home signs and Martha's Vineyard signing, which were the rudimentary ways the deaf generally communicated with their families before receiving any education. American Sign Language did not exist before the school opened, so by having built a new language for the deaf, the school tackled a barrier, because now the deaf were able to communicate formally, and this opened up many doors that were previously locked. Today, there are two methods of teaching language at the school, which are manual and oral. The manual way is sign language, and the oral way is lip reading. The school has gone above and beyond to make sure the deaf were and are able to communicate. The hard of hearing were looked down on in society before this because they could not communicate, and because of that, they were seen as incapable of mental achievement. By teaching deaf students American Sign Language, the school shattered communication barriers in the United States. The legacy of the American School for the Deaf continues to break barriers not just for the deaf today. The school was one of the first in the United States to recognize the importance of educating those with a disability, and was the first to receive government funding for educating the disabled. Because the school was and still is successful, schools for students with all kinds of disabilities have been established in the United States. The South Carolina School for the Deaf and Blind opened in 1855. This would not have been possible if the American School for the Deaf had not paved the way by being the first permanent school for the deaf in America. The American School for the Deaf has taught society about equality and acceptance and the true value of education. Its legacy provides education and equality for all people with disabilities.
This is possible because the American School for the Deaf was successful in being the first permanent school to understand the importance of educating those with disabilities. The school opened many doors for the deaf. The acceptance for someone with a disability is much greater now than it was in times before the school. We see evidence of this now as deaf individuals are successful entrepreneurs, scientists, and athletes. Even in federally funded schools, there are many programs that help educate students with disabilities. Barriers were broken by the establishment of the American School for the Deaf, and the school's legacy continues to break those barriers today. The school is also continuing to be more inclusive, as now they invite students with different disabilities to their classroom. It has been discovered that autistic children are responding favorably to sign language.
Many on the autistic spectrum respond favorably to visual communication. They won't talk to you, but we're finding they'll sign. And it's not as intrusive, it's not as much of a commitment for them, they're not using their voice. It's a much gentler form of communication we're finding that they respond to. Whereas in the oral world, they shut down. They just shut down. But in the visual world, they open up. Many people in the United States are not aware that deaf people fought and sometimes still fight an uphill battle to receive the same opportunities as hearing people. It is very important to understand the fight for equality Thomas Gallaudet started. Throughout history, people have not been treated equally for things that make them who they are. In order to be sensitive world citizens, the hearing community must learn about the deaf struggle so we can all be respectful towards the deaf community. Equality issues that are not just about the deaf still face the world today, but by learning how the deaf were not treated fairly and how that was stopped, we can break down the barriers that keep us apart time and time again.